Welcome to the Yoke and Abundance podcast. It is such an honor and a privilege today to be talking to two authors, a mother and daughter duo, LAN CAO. Did I get that correct?
Yeah.
And Harlan Margaret, right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, welcome to the Yoke and Abundance podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for being here. So you two have one of the most eloquent, exquisite memoirs that I have read probably ever, launching this September, I believe. Is that correct?
September 15th.
So I love, memoir is my favorite genre, and I think this needs to be required reading for all women that love memoir.
Thank you. That really means a lot. Thank you.
So you two wrote this book from both of your perspectives, right? And it is, oh my goodness. So I'm struck by so many things. So I'm a little bit overwhelmed and honestly a little bit nervous to be interviewing you two because I just loved it so much. I mean, I told you before we started recording that I cried, I laughed. I mean, your book broke my heart open. And Lan, so you were a refugee from Vietnam, and you came over in very young, in a formidable age, and have lived here. And so you write about your experience both in Vietnam as well as in the United States. What was it like to write about that from a first-person perspective? Because this isn't your first book.
That's astute of you to point out, because certainly a memoir form is new for me, and it's just drastically different from writing in the fictional form. I also am a law professor, so I write a lot of law review articles and law books. And so I do three types of writing, right? One is legal scholarship, which is very research-based, but it's all on subjects that I care about, like women's rights, human rights, economic empowerment. So they come out of my heart, and also rule of law, which is how do poor countries become richer. But those are, even though they're very close to my heart, that's why I choose those topics, and that's my area of scholarship. The mode of writing is a much more externally driven mode, right? So your choice of topic is heart driven, but what you write is research-based. I mean, it has to be based on the data and the facts. And then what you do with the facts is, of course, your thesis. With fiction, it's all heart-based for me. I mean, I don't consider myself a writer in the sense of I'll just pick whatever topic and make writing out of it. It has to be really stuff that I am grappling with, that you sort of stick your hand into the deep bowels of your body and take that stuff out, right? So I'm not a writer where, oh, you know, I want to write about a construction crew, because my life has not been entwined around construction crews. So my writing is very heart-based. But the fiction form, I've chosen it because it's allowed me to maintain a certain distance that is palatable for me. Meaning I want to touch certain areas, but sometimes you just can't go there too deeply. And the fiction form allows for that kind of weaving of the imagination and the weaving of stuff that's not there mixed with what's there. The memoir is just, even though there are different versions of the truth, because people will have different versions of the same event, just based on your point of view, your history, your culture, how you view something. It is still based on a commitment with the reader that what you write is your truth, right? It's not mixed with some other creativity. So that's so new to me, and it was hard. It was very hard for me to do. And I've avoided it consciously, actually. And the only reason how I could have done it was because Harlan was involved. She wanted to write things in her chapters that involve me, And because of that, I was compelled to at least orbit around that subject in my chapter. If she hadn't done it, I probably wouldn't have touched it.
And, you know, I always say, like, I feel like my mother, it would be so much easier for her to write, like, 1,001 pages of fiction or like a report on something than 50 pages of herself. Because, but, you know, we are very close, so she's told me so many things about herself that, to me, people need to hear. Not because it's like, oh, we're better or our story is more, but just because it's also just about like resilience. And she is my role model. So it's important to me that the story is told. And I really wanted to pull her out of that, especially because I feel like a memoir, especially because it's meant to look back on one's life, which is odd because I started when I was like 15, 16. So I literally had nothing to talk about. That's what I thought at the time. But I thought she had been through so much, like 100 people's worth of stuff. So I really thought it was important for her to do that. And I've always been more extroverted. So I think it balances out too. Like even in the memoir, if you see that she doesn't address something that I wrote, then it's kind of implied and the reader can take away, then maybe there's two different perspectives. That's the point, you know, even if everything doesn't match up. I think that's the reason why you have two different perspectives.
We didn't want a situation where she says something and I must respond.
Yeah.
So and we wrote very separately. So it's not as
because
if
otherwise we would fight.
Yeah, we didn't plan anything in terms of what she's going to write, what I'm going to write. We had totally separate writing space, and we didn't discuss anything ahead of time. And in many ways, it was a very organic and serendipitous journey for us. So it's not planned that she writes this and I'm going to respond in that kind of line drawing. It's not like here's one point and here's an arrow connecting that point to another point.
That makes so much sense.
There's construction.
Oh, there's construction. But
we can't hear it on my end.
Something, I would kind of orbit around it if she has. So when the draft was done and I saw what she wrote, you know, before we turned it in, I may address it a little bit in a subtle way sometimes. And
yeah, and there was obviously stuff that would, like, if she hadn't addressed it, it would obviously be like the elephant in the room. So with stuff like that,
and it's obvious too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the reader would notice that, oh, she mentioned this, but it was not in this part. And I think that in a conversation, sometimes the silence is just as loud as what is said, right? So it's just like because I play piano, I like a lot of music analogy. When you play the piano and you look at what the composer writes in the music sheet, it's not constant notes. The notes are just as important as the rest to beat. So that silence is sometimes there and noticeable, and it's deliberately not addressed, let's say.
Absolutely.
So I like that. You know, I didn't want a kind of, okay, you say this, I say that in response.
And that's a beautiful piece of your memoir. And now that you say that each chapter wasn't a response to one another, that makes so much sense. I didn't actively think about that. I'm really curious where the idea for this memoir came from. Whose idea was it?
Neither one of ours. Okay, because as I said, you know, Harlan was 15. He wouldn't have thought like, oh, let me write a memoir.
And at that time, we were not harmonious.
Yeah, she was in the turbulence
yeah,
of, you know, entering into teenage years, and you know, she had ear pods in her ear. You can hardly talk to her. So it's not like we were sitting down and saying, let's have this idea of doing an interactive.
Yeah.
I mean, we were having problem interacting in real life, much less on the page. So, and I would not pick the memoir form because it's not natural for me.
Yeah. The publishing house
contacted us. And so it was kind of like this event that was dropped onto our space. I was ambivalent about the event for the reasons I've already given, but the genesis was that we had done an interview for StoryCorps, which ran on NPR. And that interview began, I think, when Harlan was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very long interview, maybe an hour's worth, and they just saved it. And it never ran. 3 years later or so, in 2018, they ran it, and NPR ran it because it was the 50th anniversary of the Tet Offensive, which happened in '68, which was a watershed event in the Vietnam War. So the producers took out a segment from the interview that dealt with the Tet Offensive, and the interview was between Harlan and me. Harlan would ask me a question and I would answer. That was how it was. That was the format NPR wanted to use. So it ran, and I think people at Viking heard it and approached us and said, oh, this is a great idea for a book in which it's a mother-daughter voice, but the daughter has a simultaneous voice with the mother. And it doesn't look backward for the daughter. I mean, it's simultaneous to her present life.
And because Memoir is technically nonfiction, so it's not going to go in the creative department of Penguin. It's the people who do biographies and stuff also. So they're very focused on like a theme, like they really like structure. So that's when they decided, okay, so the interview is the NPR interview was incredibly, very focused on the war itself, but they decided we're going to make the theme about war and show the domino effect, because by that time I was obviously older, so I was old enough to kind of show I guess like the effects of her trauma on parenting, mm-hmm. and how it affects my decision making, everything. You can see it, like the social skills, my social skills, for all we know, could be completely affected and determined by her experience in high school 40 years before. Mm-hmm. You know, and you don't, and it's not unique to us. I think every mother-daughter pair has an effect like that, and they don't know. The only difference is that we have the publishing contract and we can talk about it. Obviously, like not every relationship will be pushed by war, but there's always something, you know, everyone's gone through something. So the family next door probably has something intense also. I think it's just about the way that we can discuss it and the opportunity.
And I think during that time, you know, when the idea was posed, there's a lot floating in American space about immigration, you know, refugees.
The age of Trump and stuff.
Yeah. So it became a kind of, what about the American story of the people who fled to America? And what is the personal story? How does you know, in feminism, there's the personal is political, right? So how does our personal story fit into the political conversation that the country was having, right? Because suddenly immigration was anathema, even though it was framed a lot of times in polite circles as a kind of like, oh, we're only talking about illegal immigration. But it became, you know, a kind of a way for people to express a kind of hostility to immigration that was quite shocking for me, actually. I did not realize that it was there. So when we wrote the book, it was in that context too. So Viking wanted a story about war, the after effects of war, trauma, but migration, and the debate surrounding that. Even though it's a memoir, we are in a political context.
Yeah, and I also feel like there's subtle, I mean, it was unintentional, but subtle discussions about like feminism too, like
in the book.
Yeah. Because I don't know, like when I talked about high school for me and my experience with like boys, I think it's very important to not say men are rapists, men are, you know, misogynists, nothing like that. It's just, this is my experience. It's implied that maybe I was surrounded by misogynists, but then, you know, I'm using that word right? Okay. And, but I would never blatantly say it. So I think that's also what was good with writing with my mother. Because she was so shy, we kind of compromised. And I do think like implying is always the safest and the most aesthetically pleasing way to do it anyway. But I think if I hadn't been with her, I'm very clumsy in how extroverted I am. I think I might have caused more controversy with that. So it was very important, like, that we discussed that. We discussed strategies.
We have a good balance.
Yeah. We discussed strategies, but not
because
content.
We're very different in personality and very, very solitary inward, and she's very group oriented and outward. So that shows in our writing also. And when we talk a lot on women's issues, because how can we not?
Oh my gosh, you did so well. So what I'm thinking is one of the things that I loved so much about this book is the balance that you struck between the implying and the subtle, as well as the saying some things outright. It's like you really struck that balance so well. But the feminist perspective, I mean, I think one of my favorite parts in the book, Harlan, was actually when you talked about your mom using the Disney movies to teach you about feminism, and how you thought it was a buzzkill. Like, you're this little kid and you're learning. I wish I had learned that at that age.
Yeah, when Shrek came out, I was so pleased because I'm thinking, okay, finally there's a children's movie that turns this awful male-female framework dynamic upside down. And there's so much about how women are raised in a cultural atmosphere where messages are imparted in a very insidiously innocent way. Like if you were living in an authoritarian society, you would have propaganda, and it would be very obvious. I mean, the thing about propaganda is that you are being subject to propaganda. But the way girls are raised, I believe, is a form of propaganda, but it's just so pervasive, it's like the air. And you don't even know that you have absorbed it until somebody points it out, right? So the idea, for example, that, and I try to teach this to her because I have a daughter, that girls are kind of like, they just have to be, right? They have to be pretty, they have to be likable, they have to, the stuff that are valued for girls to me tend to be about, being pleasing, but boys are taught to do. So their worth comes from things that they can control, right? This is what I'm doing, and I have a goal. And the girl is just like, okay, I'm sleeping until Prince Charming comes and kisses me, and then I'm awakened. I mean, that just says so much about the fact that fairy tale is beloved itself.
Yeah, I actually recently did a solo podcast episode that released when this episode comes out a few months back, but I'm a single woman, and I have recently, I'm 37 years old, and it's the first time in my life where I have let go of that idea that I need a mate in order to be happy, that I need a mate in order to be fulfilling. And it was not even an idea that I realized I was holding on to.
Yeah.
And I don't know, because that subtle messaging comes in so strongly that we will only be fulfilled when you've hit X, Y, and Z box, married, mate, like in a committed partnership, have a child, and build a family.
And also the idea of, because sometimes you do something and you say, well, I want it, I like it, it's my choice. And it's important to also look at where your choice comes from, because the choice is not just inside your head as an autonomous self, right? So for example, in Vietnam, when I grew up, I look at all my pictures as a child, all my dolls have blonde hair and blue eyes. But nobody even notices that, right? Vietnam was a French colony. And so yeah, it is my choice to now grow up. If I see somebody with blonde hair or blue eyes, I think, oh, that's pretty. And that is my choice to think that. I mean, meaning it's my individual preference. But where does that come from?
Right.
So a lot of things that maybe men or boys are taught to want it's not like, oh, they're born thinking that maybe, you know, maybe how do we know what's intrinsic in a personality and what's been inculcated in a way that you don't even know? And I think it's very important for girls to realize, yes, this is what I like, but hey, why do I like that?
Yeah. And that theme came across so well in your book. Another thing I wanted to ask the two of you about is, I mean, this is probably one of the more obvious questions, but I love my mother dearly. I don't think she and I could do this. I mean, I don't think it would be possible for us to write in this way without murdering one another. So I'm wondering, what was the process of writing together like? And you've already said that you didn't write in reaction to one another's chapters. So how were you able to simultaneously tell your stories?
You want to start?
Well, okay. So in the beginning, so we're talking like when I'm just about to turn 16, I think I was very critical of her. I had a lot of anger because by that time, I think when you go, especially for girls, because I think they grow up a little bit faster than boys, at like 15, 16, I became very aware. And I started to notice, because I started to go into therapy, actually, I started to realize how my actions may have been affected by the way my mother chose to raise me. And because already at that point, I'm hormonal, I'm kind of pessimistic, you know, I did take it as an opportunity to use it as sort of like anger therapy against my mom. I ended up deleting a lot of the pages, they're not in there anymore. But when she read them, that launched a very big problem. Even though what I wrote to me wasn't like factually false, the point of view was hostile. So it's important that when I wrote, I tried to stay calm. But by the time I hit 16 and a half, 17, I was way more level-headed just because I was more stable. Like when I started the book, I was moving high schools because I wasn't fitting in. So that's already a problem with self-esteem. After that, we wrote pretty much separately. It's a little difficult though, because even though my story is chronological, it's easier for me because it's just 16 years worth, and hers is like, it's much more than that. So she had to write chronologically, but also somehow fit me in. So it's jumping around more. So that actually helps sift through possible problems, because it's not gonna be, I'm gonna write something and then she has to read over it and then respond. So what would happen though is the editor and the agent would act as a mediator. I think they could sense there was some kind of attention. They tried to do it very gently. They were like, you have to kind of respond here. And I would be like, I don't want to, because we would be in an argument, and my mom would be like, well, you have to. And then in 2 weeks it would be due. So let's say we're like having problems, not even about the book, just like family typical stuff, I would not want to write. And I have a kind of personality where I don't have to plan. I don't have to brainstorm. I could just sit down. Oh my God. I could just sit down. Hey, Adrian. I could just sit down and 2 days before and write the chapter. I probably shouldn't admit that, and it probably upsets her, but she's very different.
We're very different.
She's a ponderer. She likes to
I tend
plan.
to plan ahead. So in terms of the writing, you know, I'm thinking, you know, we need to turn the book in by such and such a time. And see, and I feel victimized because I'm stuck with this person who is a procrastinator, who has a kind of, you know, like a kind of like, and it's sweet. It's sweet because if I can be more like that, I think I would be happier, right? So it's not like I want to use myself as a model for her, because I think that I am, and I think that I'm very much kind of like plan A, plan B, plan C. Because when we left Vietnam, it was like the entire world has turned upside down. And so when I came here, the only route towards going upward is through education. And I was 13, I was entering high school right away, and I knew, you know, every grade counted. It's not like I was in middle school. So the grade in high school counted for college and subsequent. So it was very planned. Everything I did was planned and very segmented and very meticulous.
Because it's her only way out.
Yeah,
right?
it's my
Like,
only way out. So when I'm stuck writing with somebody whose natural personality is easygoing, she's already easygoing. She doesn't think anything goes wrong. In other words, if we have a flight that leaves at 1 and we have to go to LAX, why do we need to be there 2 hours earlier? Right. So yeah, the car will not break down. There will be no traffic. We don't have to take any of that into
no, but it's so
consideration.
interesting because that personality comes from the fact that I never had to worry because she did it for us. You know what I mean? Like,
But
and I also
when
want to
you're
compensate
writing,
for
when
it.
you're writing, and it's due, I'm thinking you haven't written it yet. But you know, she's very fast in her writing. She procrastinates, and the stuff that comes out, and we also have different writing style. I'll ponder, and hers will just come out as is. And
She goes, "Are you going to revise it?" And I was like, "No." Are you calling me a bad writer, Mom? And she's like, "No, I feel like you should just reread it because that's what people do." And I was like, you know, at the time, like you're at that age where you're like, well, I'm not people, you know, I'm better than everybody. And I was always just overly confident. Like I've always either been like, if this is like the self-esteem line, I've always been here or like here. It's never like at the healthy level of like planning. I'm always thinking like, at that point, I'm thinking I will pull it off. And sometimes I hated what I wrote, but I figured people hate what they write anyway, like no matter what. It's like when you listen to your own voice on tape or you look at something you painted, like you will never look at it objectively. So if the editor is happy with it and if my mom is slightly offended by it, then I know I did a good job because I wrote it well. And that's what mattered to me.
so, you know, we definitely had the issue of the personality clash and how we approach writing. The writing became very turbulent. Not just what's in there, but when is she going to write? When are you going to turn it in? Do you have a timeline?
Like, why are you going to a party when you know you have a due date tomorrow? And she's like, have you started? And I was like, yes, I have. And I know for a fact I have 30 pages I have to bang out. And I'm totally calm. Hadrian, please. He barks for attention because he knows he gets praise when he barks.
Well, because we're thinking, you know, he's a guard dog, right?
Yeah.
So you'll be a protective boy. And now when we don't pay attention to him, he barks just to get attention.
Well, you know, I was thinking as I was reading your book, how great it would be to have you as a mom because, because I was like, oh, I could use more of that. Like I need to get it done energy and that reminder to have a plan B and C because I'm a little bit more like Harlan and flying by the seat of my pants. I'll put it that way. But I could use some of that other energy. You know, one of the, there are so many relevant themes in this book. Immigration, feminism, the mother-daughter relationship. But one of the big themes that really struck me is how Lon, how you didn't want Harlan to be hyphenated. And that comes through in how you talk about your own experience, I believe. Can you share a little bit more about what that meant to you?
I have always been ambivalent about it, the hyphenation. Because I felt like I straddled so many different identities, you know, kind of like race, gender, not born here, refugee, immigration. I'm kind of fragmented, right? So a part of me always felt like it would be great if she were just unified. And that's sort of my heart feeling, even though in my head, and in my heart too, I don't believe in that kind of purity. You know, in other words, I'm not a kind of like, oh, you must be purely nationalist or this is your one identity. I don't believe that. But yet I'm emotionally drawn to it. So there is it's not a battle between the heart and head, but it's a battle within the heart. So it's, you know, sometimes you want two contradictory things. And it's just like you can have two contradictory ideas, which you can reconcile in a cerebral way. But if you want two contradictory things, you cannot reconcile it in a cerebral way. It's not an intellectual process. And the thing that I want, actually, you know, unification, but also hybridity, is internally inconsistent. In other words, you know, it's great to have exposure to all different kinds of culture within yourself. Not that you have to pick up from reading a book or from traveling. Because I have East-West in me, I have insider-outsider status in me, right? So it's great because it gives you an expanded perspective. And I like that. And I believe in it. But it creates a lot of internal struggle. And the emotional problem that comes with it is that you feel really like you don't belong anywhere. And even when you're in, quote, your own group, you are an insider in your own group, right? So let's say you go to a feminist group. You know, I'm going to be the minority feminist, so I'm going to be a kind of an outsider even within that group, right? Or if you go to an Asian or Vietnamese group, the way we assimilate in the Vietnamese community is already very different. Some of us, you know, let's say I have a more writerly sensibility, so I question the issue of assimilation. But those who have more kind of like, I need to survive, I need to adopt the mainstream culture wholesale, I'm going to have a kind of hybridity with them. So when you are just kind of circling and caught in this maelstrom of identity, I think it's great, but I also think it's very lonely. So it's hard to reconcile it. So there was a period where I just thought to myself, it's great if she could just be simplified. And you know, a lot of times you think of assimilation, you think of assimilation into the mainstream. So it's kind of like a white standard. And I know that there are problems with it, but emotionally, you could find yourself being drawn to it anyway. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you want things that you don't want. So I really regret the fact that I never really spoke Vietnamese to Harlan when she was as a baby to make it her mother tongue. And by the time I changed my mind, it's now a foreign language to her. So that's one area where you see how the ambivalence, the consequence of that ambivalence in very practical terms, right? She is able to say the 6 tones, which is very hard to be able to produce if you are a foreign language learner. Like if you learn Vietnamese as an adult, it's very hard to have that 6 tone. She has the 6 tones because I think she heard enough of it to be able to absorb it, but she doesn't have the fluency of the language, and that's because I didn't want her to be hyphenated. And now I'm ambivalent about it. I wish she were, right?
Yeah. Well, I loved that piece of the book. So thank you for sharing that. And I loved how what you thought about that seemed to change throughout the book. So it came across very well of how you grappled with that. So thank you. And Harlan, so shifting gears a little bit, okay, so you're writing this book as 16, 17, 18-year-old, right? And you're writing about difficult, traumatic, personal events that are happening. And the way you were so open-hearted with us in sharing that story was a gift. So thank you so much for sharing what you shared about your life, because I think that there are a lot of teenagers out there who actually feel that way and go through similar circumstances and need to know that they're not alone. And I think that your piece in that story is going to be really important for other people. But I'm wondering, did you have any pause about putting some of those things out into the world? Did you worry about sharing those stories that included other people and what they might think? Was that a difficult piece of this?
It's funny because, you know, you use the word trauma, and because I think I am so used to hearing about my mother's trauma, which is a very different kind. Okay, it's very clearly traumatic. For example, I mean, I don't want to get too much into it and graphic about it, but, you know, I mentioned like sexual assault and stuff like that. I honestly did not see it as traumatic, okay? And I think it speaks to a implied numbness, because objectively you read it and you're thinking that is borderline rape, okay? But for the girl, I did not see it that way. It's not because someone said, do you think this is kind of rapey? And I was like, no, it just never occurred to me. And I never told anybody about it just because it didn't even cross my mind. I know that's very odd. It's not like I felt pain from it and I wanted to keep it a secret because I'm like, oh, I'm ashamed. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, because thankfully my mom didn't raise me in a cultural way where it's like, oh, it's your fault. So I didn't think, I still in fact dressed the same. I was never like, oh, it's because I showed cleavage or whatever. It just didn't occur to me as traumatic until probably a year later. And I thought like, wait a minute, that's actually kind of what it is. It's, you know, the R word. And so by the time I had written it, honestly, during the time I wrote it, I was numb. So it didn't even hurt me to write it. The main challenge for me was writing about my dad, because to me, the most traumatic thing is not what's done to me, but losing something. And it's sad because with my father, I want to be mature enough to think, okay, usually kids are going to worship the less present parent anyway, because it's easy to assign positive attributes to someone who's not there rather than pick at the negative things that the most present parent does. As I said, like, especially at that age, I'm thinking, going to therapy, I'm thinking to myself, like, maybe my numbness towards this sexual assault, for example, comes from the fact that I am used to comparing my life to my mother's trauma. So I don't see it as a big deal. Cause like in comparison to leaving an entire country on an airplane and starting over and being racially targeted in high school the way my mom was, a sexual assault is a completely different thing. I don't want to say it's less, but to me it was, just because we handled it so differently. And so writing, and also writing about the guy or just girls in the story, I do not want to sound immature. I'm still concerned about it. If I'm being honest, I haven't read my part back in about a year, probably over a year, because I'm so scared to like cringe at my own stuff, even though I know people who read it now probably wouldn't. It's just because I wrote it that I don't want to read it back. I never gave a second thought to if they would be upset. Also because, you know, we had lawyers read over it and they were like, you have to change, you have to disguise these people better. And I'm thinking like, but why? Like, why? Like, he deserves it. Like, right? Like, I already changed his name. I didn't even do anything to him for what he did to me, which even though I say that I don't care about it, I'm sure it's affected me in deeper ways and hurt my future relationships in some sense.
I mean, it was very traumatic, you know, because I had to move her out of these schools. You know, in high school, it's already very turbulent, socially turbulent. And in 10th grade, was it 10th grade?
Like 9th, 10th.
But when did you move? 10th grade, right?
Yeah, into junior year.
Middle part of 10th grade, it was so bad. This was during the Harvey Weinstein stuff happening in the world. And I had mentioned the feminist stuff about the personal is political, right? you remember the book called Fat is a Feminist Issue and all of that, right? That there are a lot of things that women do to ourselves that have roots in the political world. And so the same thing was happening to Harlan, right? She had very similar experience of slut shaming, various forms of harassment. And I found out about it. And she was very worried about how she would fit in high school if we reported it to the principal. And I felt like we can't replicate the Harvey Weinstein stuff in the world and not talk to her about it and let us reproduce that dynamic.
Hadrian, no.
So I was hoping she would want to talk to, I was hoping that she would want me to go talk to the principal, but she didn't. So this is a very big problem when you are parents and you have to handle your kids' problem. Mm-hmm. How much autonomy do you give them? Because by forcing them to do this, to report when they don't want to, maybe you're adding to the trauma, I don't know. But there was so much happening in the outside world about it that I didn't want her to just let it coast. So I had to explain to her, you know, these boys can still be changed. They're still young. They need to be told that this is not okay. So they don't grow up to be like the grown-ups that we are reading about, right? And it turned out, you know, that when we did do it, talk to the principal, nothing happened. I mean, we had to change schools. I mean, because all of these things were deleted. We didn't have the sort of proof. It was he said, she said. And her standing, in fact, did immediately plummet in high school. It became worse once it was found out that she did go talk to the principal. And the boys, the group that was pecking at her, changed their tactic. So it was more like they're standing in the hallway and doing a kind of talking among themselves that she could hear, but it was not directed at her, so it was not an actionable act. So the only option was she got to leave that school. And this was in April, and you know, that's the end of the school year. There was no school that would take her. So I had to put her into an online school. And so from April to June, we were online. And I, of course, had to find a different school for her. And we even thought of getting an apartment in a different school district, just so that I could put her in a different school. So all of this was going on while we were writing the book. And I think she incorporated some of it in there.
But I wouldn't say, I wouldn't admit this kind of stuff, like how hard it was to move, just because I don't like feeling like I am a victim of bullying. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like it when people use that word. My boyfriend from the new school, his friends would say, like, why did you move from the first school to this school? Because technically in the district, it's known that the school that I moved from is the best school. Like, in terms of just like, it's like where the rich kids go, like everyone has a tutor. And then the new school was like on the border of the city, where it's not like as nice, you know, it's like more low income. So people, they're confused. They're like, why, if you live in this neighborhood, why are you all the way over there? And people would just be like, oh, she was bullied. And I hate when it's said like that, because it's not, that's not, maybe it is what it is, but I'm not gonna call it that. Because to me, I'm sorry, mommy, but like bullying is what my mom went through in high school. And I was so determined to be good for both of us.
She kept it from me too, because I think she didn't want me to relive it or something, right?
Yeah, and it's a different form of something, yeah.
And also my bullying, I use it as a model. Like, I had no friends. And my bullying was more because, you know, like I would show up to school very obviously alien. You know, like I came at the same wave as all the Vietnamese refugees. Mm-hmm. So it was like, okay, you're an alien. You remind us of this horrible war that nobody wants to talk about. Your clothes, you know, were above your ankle. They didn't fit well. We don't want to be your lab partner. We don't want to pick you for sports games. your English is not good. But so that was what I was using as signals of alienation. And she was the opposite, right? She was elegant. She was to me, she had a lot of friends, and she was doing well in school. She was on sports team. She was going to be the captain of the high school swimming team. And so to me, it didn't feel like I didn't have any indicator that there was bullying, and she hid it.
Because I think there's such a thing as like, there's this like jealousy among girls for no reason. And it's because I couldn't, I didn't want to be friends with fake people. Like I can kind of tell, and it's just not worth the energy. Like there's this story going around right now about this girl. She's dating a distant friend of mine, a guy, and he slept with her best friend, okay? But the two girls are still friends because they just don't address it. And that's very interesting because in high school, like, I guess in order to stay like level and no problems, like you just don't really want to pick at anything. Whereas I don't think I'm capable of that. Like, I feel like if a girl did something like that, I would just say like, I don't like you, please don't talk to me again. And then that's that. Like, that's so much easier. And especially because I'm not awkward in the way I dress. I don't think, like, I am pretty, like, I guess you could say fitting to like normal beauty standards, also because I look white, right? Like I never had to face discrimination based on race. So I think it caused a lot of resentment where people think like she doesn't want to be friends with us, but like our boyfriends still kind of like her. So it's like, I can't really win either way. I'm sure I had a part in it too, because I'm also very picky with like which people I get along with, and I don't love to fake like being nice to people. I'd rather just be quiet in the car than make weird small talk. Do you know what I mean? So, but as I said, sorry, we've like strayed totally from the point.
I'm curious about this aspect of it for a lot of different reasons. One, because I think it's extremely relatable. But also I think about so many people have, and I know you don't want to call it bullying, but I think it's pertinent to this piece of the book. So many folks have, especially women, have experienced some sort of bullying at some point. And typically it leaves a mark on you. And I think about it I was definitely had a period like that in my life as well. And it changed how I interacted with women for a very long time. And it wasn't until I healed and addressed that part for myself that I was able to embrace women, embrace the divine feminine within, and see that in myself and others, the divine feminine piece. And so what I think is really important about you sharing that part of your story is that we can only hurt others in that way when we are not healed. And so by you talking about it and shedding light on it, I think it helps. There's a Robert Ingersoll quote that I love. It says, "We rise by lifting others." And by you sharing it, you are actually lifting many women by sharing that story, because I think most of us on some level have experienced something like that.
That's very sweet.
Thank you. There are so many pieces of this book that I want to talk about that I don't think we can fit into this short interview, but I want to know what each of you hope people will get from reading this book.
You go first.
I think for me, the book is very much about the journey out of a certain kind of difficulty, which to me was, sort of losing a country, coming to this country anew. And that's been a defining experience for me. And it fits in with the idea of, what America is. And I have a big stake in it, because unlike people who are born here, we came here not as native borns. I mean, we chose the country. We fled away from something. we risked a lot and left everything behind and came here. So what I want people to get out of the book is the relationship that refugees have to this country, right? But I don't think people come here to extract things from America. It's not like we come in order to smooch off. You know, I remember, you know, it's very interesting. I found in a collection of papers, just serendipitously, I was going through old papers. And in 1997, my first book, Monkey Bridge, came out. And I had a radio interview on NPR. I think it was All Things Considered. And right after that, I got this letter. It was anonymous, and it was sent to me to the law school. And the woman said, I want to ask, did you get on welfare? Did you, it was like, I had forgotten about the letter. And then I found the letter again. And I just found it maybe 2 months ago. And it makes me think that there are people, I'm sure they're the minority, let's say 10 to 20%, but 10 to 20% of 300 million, you know, that's a sizable number numerically. And I guess what I'm saying is that people, you know, who risk everything to come here, they want to contribute. I mean, there may be a period of time where maybe they're struggling, but we contribute, and we have a certain love for the country. And we see the country in its promises. And when it doesn't live up to its promise, we say, you could. You know, it's just like when I have my relationship with my daughter and I say, you know, you could make your bed. It doesn't mean I hate her. Like, why am I criticizing her? I'm saying, you know, you're sloppy today, but you could do it and you will feel better, because when you wake up and make your bed, your day feels better because you're organizing it. You're welcoming the world, right? So when you write a book and you talk about your bad experiences, like things that happened when I first came, you know, that were painful. It's not to say, oh, look at how awful this country is. It's to say, look, you had this wonderful promise. In this particular period, I met people that didn't live up to it, but it doesn't mean that, oh my God, live it, leave it, love it or leave it, like some people say. It's the opposite, because, you know, you might have been born here and you take a lot of things for granted, but we don't. And we have a stake in the good side coming out, and I know the good side is there. So it's not like you come here and you're just, you know, diluting American culture and your swarms of invaders. It's not that. I mean, people come to love the country.
And you've certainly enriched it.
Thank you. Yeah. What's the book for you?
I don't know.
What do you want people to get out of it?
I guess I just wish people would be more conscientious of everybody else. Like, it's conscientious, but also minding your own business and like staying in your own lane. It's like when it's so, this is something very small, but for example, it might have been in the book. She went to Wall Street to work her first day at the law school, the law firm. And the guy working there asked her, "Are you here to deliver Chinese food?" Like, we
didn't write this in the book.
Oh, it's like, why are you even asking? Like, even if that's your thought, because I'm not gonna lie, I've seen, you know, like, I go to Home Depot sometimes and there's like the people in the parking lot, the gardeners who are waiting for a job. I'm like, you're a gardener. I just think that to myself, but I'm not gonna like make a comment, because what if I'm wrong? It's offensive, okay? So it's weird to me that people say that. And even though this isn't related or in the book, it all goes to the same thing. Like, for example, especially now with Trump, okay? He continually goes out of his way to set back people that his supporters don't like. So let's say his supporters is a lot of evangelicals, is that what they're called? And maybe they don't support gay marriage. So he goes out of his way, he goes out of his way to try to make laws prohibiting equality, okay? And even if a Trump supporter wants to rationalize it and say that that's not what he's doing. That is what he's doing. Like, to say it's okay to fire somebody because they're gay, that is setting them back. Equality. It's always been such a question to me as to why a group of people who come, it could be immigrants, it could be gay people, they say, I don't want to be better than you. I just want to be equal. And the only difference between the two of us is I love someone of my same gender, or in terms of, I guess here, I come from a different country. Can I just be equal? And for someone who is white and born in the country to just look at them dead in the eye and say no. Like, what difference does it really make to them? It's like when I'm in high school and there's obviously something going on in my life that people will not understand. Because I didn't tell anybody about the issues that happened, because as I said, it didn't occur to me to even tell anybody. People make their own conclusions and they talk about me, and it pushes me out of the school. It's just, it all relates to the fact that nobody is conscientious anymore, and everyone would rather make assumptions and assert this kind of like, I don't even know how to describe where it comes from, this like power complex over each other. And it's so unnecessary because I just don't understand it. I've always just tried to stay in my own lane. I think a lot of people would not have so much trauma if, you know, I mean, even like, for example, I feel like a lot of our problems in the world come from I don't even know how to say this, over assertion of, like, no matter where you stand on abortion, for example, okay? There's this, in certain states, there's a law that says, like, if the kid's like 17, she has to get the parent's signature to get an abortion, right? But I'm thinking to myself, like, what if this happens sometimes? What if the dad raped his daughter, right? He's not gonna sign off on it. So it's just all these things that we think about of just not being conscious of everyone's possible circumstances. And I don't mean overly doing it. Like, I don't mean like every day in school, people should stand up and say every single morning, like, I am a girl, but I identify as him, please call me this. Like, not every day we have to do it, but you still should be sensitive to other people.
It's sort of, I guess, a more relational approach to life, you know?
Yeah.
Like what I do, does it affect someone else? Am I dominating somebody else? Do I need to dominate somebody else? So, you know, like our book is clearly only about our experience, but it has an echo in the stuff that's happening in the world.
Because I'm not in the place and I don't have the experience or, I mean, intelligence even to say something like all men are this way or all teachers are this way. But if someone reads it and they think, okay, this happened, it wasn't taken care of correctly by those who were supposed to take care of it, then it raises awareness. So I think that's where the as we were talking about, like the implication, you know, like the soul of that comes out in order to subtly relate it to other branches of the world. I know I got off track, but that's what I meant.
No, it's great. It's great. I'm so grateful to have both of you here. I want everyone to read your book. It is one of the most memorable, exquisite books I have read in a very long time. And I'm grateful that I got to read an advanced copy of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We always end the Yoke and Abundance interviews by asking, how do you live a life of abundance? Harlan, can we start with you?
Okay, define like abundance though.
You know what? You get to actually define it for yourself.
Spiritual abundance. I guess I try to find an equilibrium between relying on other people and relying on myself. I think if you are ever off balance, that's when you can become very lacking in happiness. If you depend too much on yourself, you have this like grandiose sense of I am all I need, like screw everybody else, then your worldview becomes so warped. But if you rely on other people, then you can no longer love yourself, because what if they go away one day? Then what do you have? You don't know yourself at all. Obviously it's easier said than done. I think everybody, like the whole point of life is to find that sense of balance. I don't know if we ever find it. I think the point is to find it together without knowing that we're finding it together. That's how you find it.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For me, I've noticed that you really cannot change anybody else. So if your notion of abundance is that if this person does this, then it would be different, right? So a lot of things that have happened in my life have happened that have been caused by external things, right? Let's say we lost the war and we had to flee. A teacher didn't like me and was intent on giving me a bad grade. So we have external things that happen to us. And I think for me, the abundance, you have to create your own abundance that does not depend on somebody doing something for or against you. And a lot of that actually comes from your shift in perspective. So just to give you a really small example, but very concrete, when we moved to California, we got this house, and outside the house is this huge, beautiful eucalyptus tree. Mm. And I didn't realize when I bought it that it actually sheds leaves every single day. It's not like, because we came from Virginia and the East Coast, autumn seasons, you have to deal with leaves that drop and you have to sweep them or rake them away. This tree just drops leaves every day. And I used to wake up every morning and I'm thinking, oh my God, this patio is filled with these dry eucalyptus leaves. And it would just make me upset because it's the first thing I see in the morning, and I like to go out there and have coffee and sit there and I'd be surrounded by these leaves. And then one day I decided, okay, you know, I had a vision in my head of seeing this movie where this solitary monk took out like a broom, and he swept, you know, the leaves in his garden. And it made this kind of scratching sound that was unbelievably calming. It's almost like a sound that you make in a temple when you have, you know, like there's a small gong, like bong, bong. So there's a rhythmic sense to the sweeping. Mm-hmm. And he did it when nobody was around. And it became meditative. And the moment you're done with it, you see the accomplishment right away. You know, so when you're writing, you don't see any sense of accomplishment because you're frustrated when you're writing, right? You don't think it's good. You think I'm blocked. It's not that pleasant of a process all the time.
It's not.
I mean, like you have to really need to write for you to quit writing, because it's not like, oh my God, I'm so inspired to write. Right? And you're critical, so you may not like it. With this little sweeping act, the patio is clean. Within 15 minutes, you have a sense of accomplishment. You have 15 minutes of solitary, totally peaceful act, and it became a positive thing. Mm-hmm. And so every time I'm faced with something that I feel like, oh my God, I feel assaulted. There's just too much going on. How do I turn assault into abundance? Only you can do it, because you can't dictate to the tree, don't shed, and you can't tell somebody, I want you to change your habit. Because what if they don't? Are you going to fight with them every day? I mean, you have to just change. And so I find that that has been very comforting for me, that the abundance comes out of how you shift the situation. And even if it can't be positive, how can you learn from it? Because not every situation can be meditative. Right? It could just be really turbulent, but then how do you reframe it for yourself to make peace with it?
I also want to say that about the reliance thing I was talking about. I think the only time it's okay to be totally reliant on somebody else is your mommy. And I'm very reliant on my mommy, even though I think during the book, we said things to each other during fights that were like maliciously violent and like vicious, just to make a point. I feel like we got it all out and we established this like end result of like a product like of art of like our relationship. So it means a lot, because like books are always going to be there unless some like 1984 something happens where everybody burns all the books, then it's always going to be there. So that means a lot to me, and she is definitely like abundance for me too.
Which is not to say, by the way, that we don't have moments of parching.
Oh, of course, of course. I think you just, Harlan, I think you just summed up the nature of mother-daughter relationship. It's like sometimes we have those moments that are very challenging because we love, I think it's sometimes that our love just can't be contained. And sometimes it comes out in really rough ways, but I think it's still also an expression of love. And if we can work through that, we get to this place of understanding. And sometimes it happens like a tide and a wave, and that you get to this really great place and then you hit the shore again and then you gotta come back up. At least that's been my experience with my mom. But thank you both so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you. We'll be in touch again.
Yeah, maybe we can send you like a signing or something.
Yeah, we can send you a book.
I'd love that.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.